I still see her standing in that doorway, one hand pressed against the splintered frame, the other holding a child who had stopped crying hours before. The village was burning behind her, black smoke rising into the canopy like prayers that would never be answered. She didn't speak, didn't scream, didn't beg. She just looked at me with eyes that understood everything and forgave nothing. That silence has followed me for 53 years, heavier than any sound I've ever heard. My name is Thomas Michael Brent. I'm 76 years old now, though some mornings I wake up and I'm still 23, still in the jungle, still trying to make sense of things that will never make sense. I served as a military intelligence officer with the 5025th Military Intelligence Group in Vietnam from March 1968 to April 9, 26 months that have somehow stretched into a lifetime. They sent me there because I had a knack for languages and a college degree in history, as if understanding the past could help me navigate what we were doing to the future. I grew up in Pittsburgh, in a row house on the south side where the steel mills painted the sky orange at night. My father worked at J&L Steel for 32 years, came home every evening with his hands stained and his back bent and never once complained. He taught me that a man does his duty, keeps his word, and doesn't make excuses. When my draft notice came in January 1968, 3 months before I was supposed to graduate from Duquesne University, he shook my hand and told me to come home safe. My mother cried into her apron and made me promise to write every week. I kept that promise, though I never told them the truth about what I saw. Some truths are too heavy to mail home. The Tet Offensive had just exploded across South Vietnam when I arrived at Tan Son and Hut Air Base. The war I'd been reading about in newspapers, the one the Nendros said we were winning, turned out to be a completely different animal than what I found on the ground. Saigon still smelled like cordite and blood. The base was chaos, choppers coming and going at all hours, wounded men crying out in languages I didn't yet understand, officers shouting contradictory orders into field radios that crackled with static and distant gunfire. They assigned me to a military intelligence detachment that operated out of a compound in Long Binh, a sprawling base northeast of Saigon that housed tens of thousands of American troops. Our job was to gather intelligence on enemy movements, assess the reliability of South Vietnamese forces, interrogate prisoners, and analyze captured documents. It sounds clinical when I describe it that way, almost academic. The reality was something else entirely. My commanding officer was Captain Raymond Stokes, a career Army man from Georgia who'd already done 2 tours in Vietnam. He had the eyes of someone who'd stopped sleeping well years ago. On my first day, he sat me down in his office, which was really just a plywood box with a fan that didn't work and a map of Thury Corps on the wall, covered in pins and annotations. "You speak Vietnamese?" he asked, though he already knew the answer was no. "I'm learning, sir. I had some French in college." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "French? Yeah, that'll be real useful with the farmers and the VC. Look, Brennan, I'm going to tell you something they didn't teach you at Duquesne. Everything you think you know about intelligence work, about separating truth from lies, about understanding people's motivations, throw it away. This place rewrites the rules every single day. Your job is to figure out who's trying to kill us and how to stop them. That's it. Don't overthink it. Don't try to understand the bigger picture, because there isn't one. Just do your job and maybe you'll make it home." I nodded like I understood, but I didn't. They paired me with Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, a black man from Detroit, who'd been in country for 11 months and had extended his tour because, as he told me with a weary smile, ain't nothing for me back in the world worth rushing home to. Marcus became my teacher, my translator, and eventually my friend. He taught me how to read the tension in a village, how to spot the signs that the VC had been there, how to tell when someone was lying not by what they said but by what they didn't say. "The silence tells you more than the words, LT," he'd say. "You gotta learn to listen to what people ain't saying." Marcus was right about that, though I wish he'd been wrong about everything else. Our work took us out of the compound regularly into villages and hamlets where the line between ally and enemy was invisible, constantly shifting, dependent on factors we could barely comprehend. We'd arrive in a village with our South Vietnamese counterparts, usually ARVN intelligence officers or national police, and we'd ask questions about VC activity, about strangers passing through, about food supplies disappearing in the night. The villagers would answer, or they wouldn't, but either way you could feel the fear radiating off them like heat from the red dirt. The first interrogation I witnessed happened in April 1968, about 6 weeks after I arrived. They'd captured a young man, maybe 19 or 20, during a sweep operation near Cu Chi. The ARVN claimed he was VC, found with a weapon and a radio. He insisted he was just a farmer who'd been conscripted at gunpoint and forced to carry supplies for one night before running away. The interrogation took place in a tin-roofed shed behind our compound, a place we called the interview room in official reports. It was 105 degrees inside, the air thick enough to chew. The young man was handcuffed to a metal chair, still wearing the black pajamas that might have meant he was VC, or might have just meant he was poor. His face was swollen on one side where someone had already hit him. Captain Stokes ran the interrogation with Sergeant Nguyen, one of our ARVN liaisons, translating. I stood in the corner with my notepad trying to look professional while my stomach churned. The question started simply enough. Name. Village. What unit was he with? How many men in his cell? Where were they planning to strike next? The young man kept insisting he wasn't VC, that he didn't know anything, that they'd grabbed him in the night and put a rifle in his hands and told him to carry it or they'd kill his family. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. In that shed, under that corrugated metal roof that turned the space into an oven, truth became whatever made the pain stop. Sergeant Nguyen did things I won't describe in detail. Things I'd read about in history books and thought belonged to other wars, other armies, other times. Captain Stokes watched impassively, smoking Marlboros and occasionally asking Nguyen to clarify a translation. I stood there frozen, my pen motionless on the pad, wondering at what point I was supposed to intervene, if there even was such a point. After 2 hours, the young man told them what they wanted to hear, named a village, described a tunnel complex, gave them numbers for an enemy unit that may or may not have existed. They uncuffed him and dragged him out to the detention area, and Captain Stokes turned to me. "Get that typed up and into the daily intelligence summary," he said. "And Brennan, you look like you're about to be sick. Go ahead and do that outside. But get used to it." That was gentle compared to what the VC do to our people. I did vomit, behind the shed where no one could see me, and then I went to my quarters and typed up the report like I'd been told. That night, lying under my mosquito net and listening to the generators hum and the distant sound of artillery fire, I tried to convince myself that this was necessary, that we were the good guys fighting an evil enemy, that sometimes you had to make hard choices in war. I tried to remember my father's lessons about duty. I tried to pray, though I'd stopped believing in God somewhere between Pittsburgh and Saigon. The information from that interrogation led to a battalion-sized operation into the area the prisoner had described. They found some tunnel entrances and a small cache of weapons. 3 American soldiers died when one tunnel collapsed. The Army called it a successful operation. I never found out what happened to the young man we'd interrogated. He disappeared into the detention system like thousands of others, became a file number in a database, a statistic in a report. That was my initiation into intelligence work in Vietnam, but it wasn't the worst thing I saw. Not even close. Summer of 1968 melted into fall, though you couldn't tell the difference by the weather. The heat was constant, oppressive, punctuated by monsoon rains that turned the red dirt into red mud and made everything rot faster. Equipment, sandbags, hope. The war ground on with a terrible momentum that seemed to have nothing to do with winning or losing, just continuation for its own sake. Body counts went up. Reports went up the chain of command. Orders came back down and the cycle repeated. Marcus and I fell into a rhythm. We'd go out on operations, gather intelligence, write reports, try not to think too hard about what our information led to. We'd sit in the enlisted club some nights, drinking warm beer and listening to Motown on the jukebox. And Marcus would tell me stories about Detroit, about the '67 riots, about growing up black in America, and then coming to Vietnam where the enemy didn't care what color you were, they just wanted you dead. "You know what's crazy, LT," he said one night, halfway through his third beer. "Back home, I couldn't sit at the same lunch counter as white folks in half the places in this country. But over here, we're all the same shade of scared. Funny how it takes a war to make people see you as equal." "That's not funny at all," I said. "No," he agreed. "No, it ain't." By October, we'd expanded our operations into Binh Duong province, an area heavily infiltrated by VC and NVA forces. The villages there had been contested territory for years, changing hands so many times that loyalty had become a fluid concept, something that shifted with the tides of war. Our job was to identify enemy sympathizers, develop intelligence networks, and support operations to clear the area. That's where I met Tran Van Min, a South Vietnamese interpreter who worked with our unit. Min was 34. Educated, spoke excellent English with a slight French accent, and wore civilian clothes that looked shabby even by Vietnamese standards. He had a wife and 3 daughters in Saigon, and he made the trip out to our forward operating base every few days, bringing his language skills and his cultural knowledge and his increasingly obvious disillusionment with the war. "You Americans," he told me once, "you think you understand Vietnam because you read books and look at maps. But you don't understand the first thing. You see V's, E and ARVN, communist and capitalist, north and south. We see families torn apart, villages destroyed, children orphaned. We see a war that has been going on for 20 years, and will go on for 20 more, no matter who wins. Then why do you work for us?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Because I have 3 daughters to feed, and your army pays better than anyone else. And because maybe, if I help you understand just a little bit more, fewer people will die. It's a foolish hope, but it's the only one I have left." Min became invaluable to our operations. He could read the subtle social dynamics in villages that we Americans missed entirely. He knew which village chiefs were secretly VC sympathizers and which ones were genuinely trying to protect their people from both sides. He could distinguish between information given willingly and information given under duress. He made us better at our jobs, which meant our operations became more effective, which meant more people died, which is its own kind of moral equation that I still haven't solved. In November 1968, we received intelligence about a village called Phuoc Vinh, about 20 clicks northeast of our base. The report suggested it was being used as a way station for VC moving supplies from Cambodia into Saigon. ARVN had tried to clear it twice before, but each time they'd found nothing, just farmers and families who swore they'd never seen any VC, never heard anything suspicious, just wanted to be left alone to tend their rice paddies. Our job was to go in before the next operation, gather more intelligence, see if we could identify specific VC sympathizers or collaborators. It was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance, in and out in a few hours. Marcus, Min, myself and a squad of infantry for security, Captain Stokes, briefed us in the TOC, pointing at the map with a red grease pencil. "Intel says there's a VC political officer operating in this area, running the local infrastructure. We need to identify him, find out where he's based, who he's working with, standard hearts and minds stuff, but keep your eyes open. This place has been hostile in the past." We loaded into 2 Hueys just after dawn, when the air was still relatively cool and the morning mist hung over the rice paddies like gauze. I'd been on dozens of these missions by then, but I still felt the same knot in my stomach every time, the same hyper-awareness of every sound and smell, the same prayer that I'd see the sunset from the other side. Phuoc Vinh looked like every other village in the Delta. maybe 40 or 50 hooches made from bamboo and thatch, arranged around a central area where a few scraggly chickens scratched in the dirt. A Buddhist shrine at one end, rice paddies stretching out in every direction, divided by narrow dikes that the farmers used as paths. A tree line 100 meters away that could hide anything. The villagers watched us arrive with the same wary resignation I'd seen 100 times before. Old women, children, a few old men, no young men anywhere in sight, which was never a good sign. It either meant they were off fighting for one side, or the other, or they'd been killed, or they were hiding. The village chief was a man in his 60s named Nguyen Van Duke, thin as bamboo, and just as bent. Through men, he told us the same story every village chief told us. No VC here, just farmers trying to survive. Please leave us alone. His eyes said something different. They said, I'm telling you what you want to hear, because I'm trying to keep my village from being destroyed. And whatever happens after you leave, we'll deal with then. We spent 2 hours asking questions, searching hooches with permission, finding nothing incriminating. Some writing, some fish sauce, some farming tools. The normal possessions of people who had nothing. The squad spread out in a perimeter, watching the tree line, waiting for something to happen. Marcus moved through the village with his easy confidence, talking the old women, making children laugh, trying to create the kind of rapport that might lead to actual information. Mean and I questioned the village chief more thoroughly, going over the same ground again and again, looking for inconsistencies in his story. He stuck to his narrative with the determination of someone who told it many times before. Yes, strangers sometimes passed through at night. No, he didn't know who they were or where they were going. Yes, sometimes there were sounds of digging after dark. No, he didn't investigate because a wise man minds his own business. He's lying, Mean told me quietly in English. But he's lying to protect his village, not the VC. If we push harder, he'll tell us something. But it might not be true. What do you think we should do? Mean looked around at the village, at the old women pretending not to watch us, at the children who'd stopped playing, at the hooches that held families trying to remain invisible. I think we should leave. We're not going to find anything here today. All we're doing is making them more afraid, and frightened people make bad decisions. He was right, of course. But that wasn't how intelligence operations work. We had orders to develop information on VC activity in the area, and leaving empty-handed wasn't an option that would satisfy the chain of command. Let's check the tree line, I said, see if there are any trail signs, any evidence of recent movement. Marcus assembled a team himself, me, Mean, and 4 infantrymen, and we moved out toward the tree line, leaving the rest of the squad in the village. The rice paddies were dry. The ground cracked and hard under our boots. A few water buffalo watched us pass with the profound indifference of creatures that had seen wars come and go for generations. We were about 50 meters from the tree line when Mean stopped suddenly. Lieutenant, he said quietly, we should go back. Why? Because I have a bad feeling. Because the birds have stopped singing. Because we're walking into something we shouldn't. I should have listened to him. Should have trusted his instincts, his experience, his understanding of this place that I would never truly comprehend. But I was 23 years old and I'd been trained to complete missions, and the idea of turning back because of a feeling seemed like weakness. We'll be careful, I said. Just a quick look. We moved into the tree line, into the shade where the temperature dropped 10 degrees and everything smelled like rot and growing things. Marcus took point, his rifle up, his movements careful and deliberate. The rest of us spread out in a tactical formation, covering each other, watching for tripwires and booby traps and any sign of the enemy. We found the tunnel entrance 15 minutes later, hidden under a false floor of woven bamboo and covered with leaves and dirt. It was so well camouflaged that we almost walked past it. Marcus spotted it only because his boot caught on the edge and he felt the bamboo give slightly under his weight. LT, got something here, he called back. We gathered around the entrance. It was maybe 3 feet across, disappearing down into darkness. The opening was too small for an American in full combat gear to fit through easily. But that wasn't unusual. The VC built their tunnels for Vietnamese bodies, not American ones. Could be storage, Marcus said. Could be a headquarters. Could be a hospital. Could be anything. Or it could be nothing, I said. Could be an old spider hole that hasn't been used in months. Mean crouched by the entrance examining the bamboo cover. This has been used recently. You can see where the bamboo has been disturbed. Within the last few days, I would say, we should have called it in right then, gotten tunnel rats from Kochi to come explore it properly, set up a proper cord, but I was young and stupid and wanted to prove something to someone. Though I couldn't have told you who or what. I wanted to be more than just the college boy who took notes during interrogations. I wanted to do something that mattered. I'm going down, I said. Sir, that's not a good idea, Marcus said immediately. We don't know what's down there. Could be VC, could be booby-trapped, could collapse on you. I'll just take a quick look. 5 minutes. If I see anything dangerous, I'll come right back up. Marcus looked at me like I was the dumbest officer he'd ever worked with, which I probably was in that moment. Then I'm going with you. No, you're in charge up here. If something happens, you get everyone back to the village and call in support. Before anyone could argue further, I stripped off my web gear, keeping just my pistol and a flashlight. I lowered myself into the entrance feet first, feeling for the ladder that I hoped would be there. My feet found wooden rungs, and I started down into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight showing me earth walls and timber supports and nothing else. The tunnel at the bottom was maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, forcing me to crouch. It smelled like earth and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. The air was close, difficult to breathe, the kind of air that had been underground too long. My flashlight beam showed the tunnel extending ahead into darkness, disappearing around a curve about 10 feet away. Every training session, every briefing, every lesson I'd learned said to go back up right now. But I did. I moved forward, crouching, my pistol in one hand and the flashlight in the other, deeper into the earth. Around the curve, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with bamboo sleeping mats and some ceramic pots in the corner. Supply cache, or a temporary shelter. Still no sign of recent occupation, no warm ashes in a cooking fire, no personal effects. I was about to turn back when I noticed another tunnel entrance on the far side of the chamber, smaller than the first, partially hidden behind a hanging mat. I should have stopped, should have marked what I'd found and retreated. But I'd already committed to being an idiot, so I pushed aside the mat and moved into the second tunnel. This one sloped downward, deeper into the earth, the walls damp with moisture that seeped through the clay. My flashlight showed scrape marks on the floor, evidence of recent traffic. Whatever this was, it was active. I moved forward slowly, trying to be quiet, though I knew that stealth was impossible in the confined space. The second tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the first, and my flashlight beam found what I hadn't expected to find. A hospital, or what passed for a hospital in a VC tunnel complex. 6 wooden platforms serving as beds. Medical supplies in boxes along the walls. IV bags hanging from bamboo poles. And on the platforms wounded men, some unconscious, some staring at me with fevered eyes, some too far gone to even register my presence. The smell hit me then, the smell I hadn't been able to identify before, blood and infection, and dying flesh, and the particular stench of gangrene. It was the smell of wounds that weren't being properly treated, of men dying slowly in the dark. I stood there frozen, my pistol pointing at men who couldn't fight back, my flashlight illuminating a scene that belonged in a nightmare. These were the enemy, the VC who were trying to kill us, who planted booby traps and launched rockets into our bases and murdered village chiefs who wouldn't cooperate. I should have felt vindicated, or victorious or something. Instead, I felt sick. They never investigated the allegations in my report. Instead, they investigated me. They accused me of unauthorized disclosure of classified information, of violating operational security, of prejudicing good order and discipline. They leaked to friendly media that I was unstable, that I'd suffered a breakdown, that my allegations were the result of PTSD and couldn't be trusted. Some of that was probably true. I was unstable, in the sense that I was having nightmares about children in rubble, that I couldn't close my eyes without seeing Omar's crushed skull, that I'd wake up screaming because I could still hear his mother calling his name. If that's what they meant by unstable, then guilty as charged. But PTSD doesn't make you see things that aren't there. It makes you unable to unsee things that are, and what I saw was real. The photographs I'd taken were confiscated. The journals I'd kept were classified. The other soldiers who'd witnessed the same things I had were warned that discussing operations with unauthorized personnel could result in prosecution. They built a wall of classification and operational security around the truth. And they painted me as someone who'd violated that security rather than exposed crimes. I was offered a deal: retire quietly with full benefits, sign an NDA about classified operations, make no further statements about what I'd witnessed, and they'd drop all charges. The alternative was court-martial, possible conviction, prison time, dishonorable discharge, loss of all benefits. I took the deal. I'm not proud of it, but I took it because I was exhausted and broken and I didn't have the strength left to fight. They let me retire as a decorated combat veteran, let me keep my pension and benefits, let me walk away from 22 years of service with my honor technically intact. But I know the truth. I know I compromised. I know that in exchange for my silence and my security, I agreed to let them bury what I'd witnessed. I know that children are still dying in Gaza while I sit here in safety, bound by an agreement that prevents me from speaking publicly about what I saw. This memoir is my attempt to live with that compromise, to find some way to bear witness even within the constraints I've accepted. I can't discuss specific classified operations or intelligence. I can't name certain individuals or locations, but I can tell my story, can describe in general terms what I witnessed, can try to convey the human cost of decisions made far from the battlefield. I'm back in the States now, living in a small town where nobody knows I'm a veteran unless I tell them. I'm in therapy, working through the nightmares and the guilt. Some days are better than others. Some days I can almost convince myself that I did what I could, that staying as long as I did was itself a form of resistance, that my report and documentation might eventually matter. Other days I wake up thinking about Omar, about his mother, about Dr. Mazawi, and all the other doctors trying to save lives while bombs fell on hospitals, about the Hassan family and their yellow house and the laundry that was still hanging on the balcony when we turned their home into rubble. I think about the oath I swore: support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think about how sometimes the enemy isn't foreign, isn't a terrorist in the hills or an insurgent in the streets, but is the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're willing to accept. For 22 years I was a Green Beret. I was part of the most elite fighting force on Earth, trained to operate in hostile territory, to win against overwhelming odds, to never quit and never accept defeat. I was proud of that identity, proud of the tab on my shoulder and the regiment I served with. But in Gaza, I learned that all that training, all that tradition, all that pride meant nothing if I wasn't willing to stand up when it mattered most. I learned that following orders isn't the same as doing what's right, that supporting our allies doesn't mean supporting their crimes, that sometimes the most courageous act a soldier can perform is to refuse. I learned it too late to save Omar or his mother or the thousands of others who died while I watched and documented and told myself I was doing what I could. But maybe not too late to say this. To any soldier reading this, who finds themselves in a similar position, who is witnessing things that contradict everything you were taught about the laws of war and American values. You have it's not an easy choice, and it will cost you, but you have one. You can follow orders and live with the consequences, or you can refuse and live with different consequences. Neither option is without cost, but I'll tell you what has cost me more than anything: the knowledge that I could have done more, that I compromised when I should have stood firm, that I accepted restrictions on my truth-telling in exchange for my comfort and security. If I could go back, I would refuse the deed. I would testify publicly, accept the court-martial, go to prison if necessary. I would do that because some truths are more important than one soldier's career or comfort or pension. Some truths need to be told even when, especially when powerful institutions want them buried. The truth about Gaza is that I witnessed systematic violations of international humanitarian law. The truth is that American military personnel provided support and legitimacy to operations that killed thousands of civilians, that destroyed hospitals and schools and homes, that treated entire populations as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of military objectives. The truth is that children died in rubble while I watched, that mothers screamed for babies who would never answer, that doctors were treated as terrorists for trying to save lives, that everything I'd been taught about American values and the laws of war meant nothing when weighed against political expedience and alliance politics. The truth is that I'm complicit, that I participated, that I supported, that I didn't do enough to stop it, that when it mattered most, I chose my career and my security over the lives of people whose names I'll never know but whose faces I'll see until the day I die. This memoir can't change what happened. It can't bring back Omar or his mother or any of the thousands who died. It can't undo the destruction or heal the wounds or make right what was made wrong. But it can bear witness. It can stand as testimony that someone saw, that someone cared, that someone was there and understood that what was happening was wrong. It can serve as a warning to future soldiers that following orders isn't enough, that wearing the uniform comes with a responsibility to uphold the principles that uniform is supposed to represent. Most of all, it can be my attempt at redemption, not forgiveness. I don't deserve that and wouldn't accept it if offered, but perhaps a small measure of atonement, a way of saying to all those I failed, I saw you, I remember you, your deaths mattered. Even if they were reduced to footnotes in classified reports, your lives had value, even if that value wasn't recognized by the people who made decisions about acceptable collateral damage. The child's shoe I saw that first day is still there, in my memory, lying in the rubble with its strap torn and its cartoon characters faded by dust. I don't know whose it was, don't know if the child who wore it survived or died, don't know if they think about that shoe the way I do. But I remember it. I remember all of it. And now, within the constraints I've accepted and with all the limitations those constraints impose, I've told as much as I'm able to tell. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what I have to offer. The testimony of one soldier who went to Gaza believing in American values and came back understanding how easily those values can be betrayed, how quickly honor can become complicity, how thin the line is between witness and accomplice. I'm 43 years old, and I feel ancient. I've lived a dozen lifetimes in the years since I first raised my right hand and swore an oath to defend the Constitution. I earned my tab and served with honor for 22 years. And in Gaza I learned that honor without courage is worthless, that service without conscience is complicity, that wearing the uniform means nothing if you're not willing to stand up when the moment demands it. This is my testimony. This is my truth, as much of it as I'm able to tell. May God forgive me for all the rest. Antonio Aguilar served 22 years in the United States Army Special Forces before retiring, and he now lives in the American Southwest, where he works with veterans organizations and continues his advocacy for accountability in military operations. The events described in this memoir represent his personal experiences and observations. Names and certain identifying details have been changed to protect individuals and comply with security agreements.